Hey guys, what's crackin'? Godsman here, coming at you with an updated Drajeweled deck profile. So, after the new wave of support from DBTO10, we finally got Drajeweled Masque, a new upgrade for the main man himself, and it's pretty glorious, albeit with some mixed reaction from folks initially due to a couple of the downsides, which we will be going into in this deck profile, but I'm just gonna say, I love this man. I think this thing definitely helped give Drajeweled a more dedicated angle to its win con, and has transitioned the deck from a sort of a one-note beatdown strategy into more of a tempo kind of deck, where attrition is the name of the game. So, as I'm going through this, I'm going to explain some of the new changes, as well as also explain some of the usual suspects of the deck, again, just in case there's some first timers and didn't see my previous deck profile that I did a few months back. So, without any further ado, let's get in. So, of course, as with any deck profile in Standard, we're going to have to start with the Rideline. Grade 0 is Jewelias Dracokid, and yes, I'm still using proxies. At me in the comments. I'm not going to invest into Standard IRL right now because the format is extremely expensive and your boy still wants to have food on his plate. So anyway, Jewelias Dracokid, you don't need this particular starter. It could literally be any sort of starter you want, so just play Fashion Guard all you want and pick whichever one looks prettiest. Now the grade 1 is where we start making meaningful choices. We've got Jewelneel Dragon. Now, Jewelneel's skill is quite simple. When he's rode upon by the Jewelneel, you're able to call him to the rear guard circle. Then, when he attacks or boosts, he can get 5,000 power, but in exchange, he goes back into the soul. This is mandatory. Thank you, flavor text. Or, sorry, not flavor text, reminder text. So, yeah, Jewelneel, a nice additional beater. You can move him behind the grade 2 of the Rideline in order to get a really secure column, which, FYI, there is an on-hit with the grade 2. But, more often than not, what I'll do instead is put them side by side, swing 13, maybe they take it, maybe they don't, move into the soul, and then swing at the Vanguard. That's one way of doing it, and the reason why you do that is so that they are less likely to hit this, rather guard this, because it is going to be a hard guard if they're grade 1. It's going to require 10k shield. It's very annoying in Standard. Now, if it's the second turn, right, and you're going second, this isn't quite as effective because their 10k base means that they can discard for 5. So that's where you're more inclined to just go this way with it. But still, pestering the net with an extra attack in this format is more or less going to be better. So that's the way I choose to approach it. However, if they are on a grade 2 Vanguard, what you can do instead is swing at the Vanguard first and then attack with the rear guard. That way, if you do get a trigger, you can transfer it over to Jewelneel, and Jewelneel can swing on the grade 2. So that's the way to use this guy in the Rideline. Now, as for Jewelneel himself, his skill is that on Vanner Rear, when his attack hits a Vanguard, you can soul charge 1. Pretty decent box enter skill for a soul charge. Soul charges are okay in this deck. They're not really the end all be all like in some other variants like Barrel Magnus or whatever, but in this they're decent. However, the second skill is the real meat and potatoes. So when he's rode upon by a Drajeweled, you're able to soul charge 1. Then if you have at least 3 different grades in your soul, you're able to draw a card. And the beauty of this is that that is essentially guaranteed, because you're going to have 0, 1, and then himself as the 2 in the soul, so you'll always get a draw. So it's effectively a soul charge and a draw. And assume the on hit did land on the grade 2 turn, that's 2 soul and then a draw. So this is where the Rideline really takes root, is with Jewelneel, and he's the cornerstone of that aspect. So yeah, we love Jewelneel. He's amazing that way. Now, I would have said the head honcho, but now he's kind of the base form of the head honcho. This is Demonic Jewel Dragon Drajeweled. Now, Drajeweled has 2 skills. The first being an axe skill, which is that you can counterblast 1 to soul charge 2, and if they have different grades, you get to draw a card. Pretty cool skill to build up soul and get advantage. And you will be doing this sometimes depending on how your counterblast is, but counterblast is a very touchy subject in Drajeweled, especially with the release of the Masque variant. So you might be inclined to never use this skill. However, the fact that it is an axe skill is very nice, because any base Vanguard that has an axe skill will have the ability to use those axe skills before you use the Masque of Hydragrum combo to go into the Masque version of them. So even when you're about to ride into Drajeweled Masque on turn 3, turn 4, whatever, you have the opportunity to use this first in order to get your advantage and build up your soul. That's very nice. Now, the second effect is the iconic effect, the dust effect, however you want to say it. When he attacks a Vanguard, you can soul blast 4 cards of different grades from the soul, reduce their power to 1, and if they're grade 3 or greater, he gains a critical. Amazing effect. It's the whole point of the deck. You try to fuel 4 different grades in the soul, the 4 flames as it were, and make them into a puny Vanguard. One thing about this skill, and that is going to be very relevant with the numbers in this deck, is that your numbers change. Now, with Vanguard, especially in standard format, we've grown accustomed to dealing with the 13k base for our quote-unquote magic numbers. The magic numbers are going to change dramatically because they're on a 1k base. Now the thresholds you need to beat over are thresholds of 5k margins. So rather than trying to hit 18, 23, 28, etc., you want to be hitting 11k, 16k, 21k to get over the 5k margins. It's funnily enough what old Vanguard numbers were, and those used to be the magic numbers. It's the same basic premise here. That's what you want to do. Because for instance, let's say you were to swing for 25 on the Vanguard. Your opponent is at 1. So they would need to just guard exactly 25 to be at 25k and 1. You see where I'm going with this. The even Steven 5k margins are not good for you. You don't want to simply swing 10. You don't want to simply swing 20. That's not going to work out. You want a little bit higher number just to be past that. And there's a couple ways to make it happen, and we'll go into that later. However, this is the basis of the entire deck, and there are even times where using this guy or the Masque variant is going to be preferable, either because you didn't see the Masque or it's the very late game and you can't afford to use the Masque variant. So for those reasons, plus he's also just fodder, this is why we need to still understand what Drajeweled does and also appreciate him as his own standalone Vanguard. Oh, and also if you're Donji, you can just ride him as a way to not counterblast that turn. Isn't that the greatest way to deal with no CB? Man's a legend. Anyway, that's only an anime reference that people who watch the anime will get. So next up, we've got 4 copies of Goma Drajeweled Masque. And alongside that, we've got 3 more copies of the base version. So, what are we doing here? Well, simply put, the base version fuels the Masque version. We're not persona riding with the base often anymore. Instead, we're going to be persona riding using Goma here. He has 3 skills. He's the new card, so let's pay close attention to what he does because it's kind of a doozy. So, first off, he can only be rode over a grade 3 card with Drajeweled in its name. AKA, he won't be your first grade 3, so that's why we don't run him the Rideline, smile. The second skill is an axe skill, which removes a copy of Drajeweled from the hand, the soul, or the drop zone from the game. This is similar to what happens with Elementaria Sanctitude or the over trigger. It gets removed completely from the game. So not bind, remove it. So by paying that cost, you get to choose any 2 cards from your drop zone and place them into the soul, and he'll gain a critical. So much like with the original Drajeweled, this Drajeweled has the ability to gain a critical. However, rather than being coupled with its main effect, it's now part of an auxiliary effect meant to set you up. That means that on one hand, you can proc this skill without even needing to CB, and additionally, it's also a skill that can help you set up. So that's the upside, and probably the biggest upside of it is it's not grade 3 or greater restricted. With the old Drajeweled, you could only get the crit if the Vanguard was at grade 3 or greater on the opponent's side of the field. This doesn't care about that. So if you're going first and you just immediately ride into this dude over, which I'll explain how you can do that despite the ride restriction, then you can immediately pressure with a crit. So that could be potentially devastating if you want to speed run through that particular matchup. Now, the main effect that this guy has is that when he attacks, you can counterblast 1 and soul blast 4 cards of different grades. Sounds familiar, right? By doing that, you now have the ability to reduce them down to 1k power, but you also get to choose 2 of their rear guards and retire them. You choosing them is really nice, and just 2 retires is phenomenal. This skill is a menace to society. It is a mad lad skill. I cannot stress enough how powerful retiring to the opponent's rears are. That already solidifies this card as a really big resource hog for the opponent. They not only have to guard from the hand to stop this dude, because with the crit pressure and them being at 1, they probably need to guard this guy, PG or not. And on top of that, they also now have to lose rear guards 2 at a time for that. Pieces are pretty important standard, and some decks in particular can't afford to lose their pieces. They don't like being retired. So this is going to be very devastating, and it burns the candle on both sides. So that's a very important skill. Now, one of the biggest complaints that people have had with Drajeweled Masque here is that his main skill is now counterblast locked. The old one didn't have that. So despite all the CB going around the deck, you can at least confidently resolve the main effect without being CB denied. This doesn't have that freedom. But we still maximize it anyway, because between the retires and the ability to recur cards from the drop zone back into the soul, which choosing 2 from the soul is a far more reliable means of building back your soul to the correct numbers than just soul charging 2 blindly from the top and perhaps not even getting a draw for it. So that's why this guy is more or less superior, but you have to be able to set him up properly and pay the costs. But it is definitely worth it. Now, in order to get this guy going, another grade 3 in the deck, and the final grade 3 in the deck, is 2 copies of Masque of Hydragrum. Now, Masque of Hydragrum is the only normal order that we have in this deck, and its skill is twofold. The first skill is that when you play it normally, you look at the top 5 cards of the deck and add a card that has Dragontree or Masque in its card name. You reveal it to the opponent, put it in your hand, and shuffle your deck. Let's put it right here. Now, in the drop zone, if you have a grade 3 Vanguard with Masque in its card name, without Masque in its card name rather, you reveal a grade 3 card with Masque in its card name from the hand. You ride the card revealed as stand. Then you put this into the soul afterwards. That's right, you put it from the drop zone into the soul, and I'll talk about the significance of that in a moment. Then, if your opponent's at grade 3 or greater, you get to activate Persona Ride. This is a huge tempo swing. That means that if you're going second, you'll still be the first one to Persona Ride, which is crazy, and you can clap back at the opponent really hard with that. It's a very impressive skill. Now, not only does this allow you to Persona Ride early, it also means that you can get this guy out as soon as turn 3, even if the opponent is going second and you don't get the Persona Ride, you can still ride into Goma here and get the critical potentially and get their retires if they decide to try and early rush you and give you the CB for it. So it's a good clapback to punish the opponent. Furthermore, we have to think about the nature of the strategy. The Rideline, as aforementioned, gives you access to a 0, a 1, and a 2 in your soul. That means the missing grade in your Rideline, the one and only grade that's not guaranteed on any given turn, is grade 3. Now, we have a grade 3 card that is recurring from the drop zone into the soul. This is valid for the cost of both Drajewels. That is very important. Another thing that you can do about to expand upon this even more is, let's say that you're on a Drajeweled Masque, right? So now you have Drajeweled Masque here, and you have a copy of Drajeweled in the hand. What that means is you're able to also ride back into the Drajeweled. Now you'd be like, why would you ride back in the Drajeweled if you want to use Drajeweled Masque? And no, it's not because of Donji's based anti-CB lock strategy. It's because if you have another copy of Goma Horyu in the hand, you can reactivate this thing from the soul. Remember, you can soul blast it for the cost of your ability, so it'll be there. You can activate this again, suck it into soul, and re-Persona Ride. So you still got to Persona Ride with this card, but rather than just doing it from one Goma Horyu onto the other, you managed to skip a step by going here and riding over for the Persona Ride so that you can get this grade 3 card into your soul. Furthermore, even if this is in the soul, it's still just as useful as it was in the hand because it can still be removed for the axe skill of Goma Horyu. So it's perfectly valid as a means of just getting a free grade 3 in the soul, and that is pretty wicked. It's a very, very nice combo for a card like this. So that is the explanation for what makes Masque of Hydragrum a really good card, on top of the fact that it's also could be potentially plussing you cards from the deck, or rather filtering it out because you're using an order card. So it's just overall really strong unit, and the same can be said for Goma. Now, yes, CB, I get it, and you can only get cards into the soul by removing a copy of base Drajeweled. I get that too, and yes, I also get that it doesn't draw you a card like base Drajeweled does, but what it gives you is field control. It gives you early Persona Ride, and it also gives you a stronger manipulation of your soul resource. Overall, it is, in my opinion, an upgrade, and although there are some select circumstances where the original is better, more or less, the game plan will revolve around Drajeweled Masque. Alright, moving on to the grade 2s, we've got a few things to talk about. So, first off, we've got a promo. Right. This is standard, so good promos are going to be the norm. Here we have Flower in the Ruins Imposa. Now, Imposa is potentially the best piece of support this deck has gotten in, like, forever. It is an incredible card, absolutely bonkers, so let's talk about it. Her skill is simply one skill, but it's a doozy. So, on the rear circle, if your Vanguard, let's just say like Drajeweled here, right? When your Vanguard Soul Blast 4 or more for the cost of its ability, if you have not stood a unit by an effect during this turn, you can restand this unit. So, yes, that is a multi-attack you see there from restanding. Very powerful. The effect continues though. Then, if you stood, which there was some confusion on the wording of that, it means if this card stood. So if you stood by this effect, then you get the other effect, which is that at the end of the turn, you may retire this unit, and if you do so, you can add a grade 2 or greater card from your soul back to the hand. That has a lot of good utility to it, but of course, not only is it a restanding Vanguard, oh no, I'm sorry, not a restanding Vanguard, a restanding rear guard in a deck that already reduces the opponent's power to 1 for beatdown strategies, it also toolboxes your soul a bit. Now, potential targets that you could add from the soul back to the hand could be things such as the Masque card, if you want to recur, or rather, sorry, not the Masque card, that's the wrong Masque card. We're talking about Goma here. Now, if you add this back to the hand, you will be able to essentially filter out and loop Persona Rides. You can add another copy back to the hand, Persona Ride in the next turn. That's a really powerful thing. You could also add any of your other grade 2s that you got. For instance, spoiler alert, Rockargour is a really powerful card here still, folks. So you can add that back. It doesn't even restrict its own name. So, for instance, let's say you soul charged a copy of this or threw it back into the soul, but you know you're facing against a deck that might be inclined to get rid of this. Maybe it's a retired deck or something. I don't know. Gandiva. Very annoying deck, that one, but I love it. So, and just hate the fight against it. So, if you already know that this thing is going to die on the rearguard circle, what you can do is you can choose to retire it just to simply add another copy of itself from the soul back to the hand. So now you have one chilling in the hand, safe from any retires or any means of your opponent to get rid of it. That is a really good strategy against field control decks, and you want to keep hold of your restanders because that's your only form of multi-attack in this deck, and that is very, very, very good. I doubt I need to explain that bit. So yeah, this is Imposa. Between the toolbox and the restands is the mandatory 4-0. Okay, next on the list, I preluded to him a little bit. It is a usual suspect in the deck. It is our boy Rockargour. Now, Rockargour has 2 skills, both very powerful. The first skill is when he attacks from rearguard circle, he gets 10,000 power until end of turn if your soul has 4 or more cards of different grades. Note, the end of turn part is going to be very important, and that's because of his second skill, which is that when he sees the Vanguard Soul Blast 4 or more for the cost of its ability, he can counterblast 1 to stand himself up. A couple stipulations about it. Yes, this is more or less the same timing as Imposa. However, unlike Imposa, it doesn't restrict itself to if you haven't stood a rearguard this turn. That means that if you are a god and have 2 Rockargours in your front row, they will both be able to stand and not care. That is really good, but is also really expensive because that is 2 counterblast. However, it might be worth 2 counterblast because remember that first skill which gave it 10k? The end of turn part comes up here because it means when it swings a second time, it's still going to be at least a 20k attacker. And when the opponent is at 1k power, ooh boy, they better be prepared to guard that or they're just going to get beat down. So very, very powerful card here. Now, I mentioned before that the old version of Drajeweled was a beatdown based strategy, and a lot of that was in part because of Rockargour's going for multiple attacks. That's what the old strategy was, and having more Rockargour, you know, you just go yippee-ki-yay and throw him out on the field and beat him up. In this new version of Drajeweled, the game plan is more tempo. So because your Vanguard has a counterblast attached to it, you probably won't be able to afford the double Rockargour. That means that you are inclined to only resolve one a turn unless you intend to kill and you have the resources for it. But you must be dedicated to kill, because otherwise you blow everything. So more often than not, if you want to achieve 5 attacks, the way you do it is by having an Imposa on one side, restanding her first. That's important. You need to restand her first, and then restand Rockargour for a CB. This is the ideal front row setup, and it only requires 2 CB a turn, but you get 5 attacks, and it's with this really powerful effect. So it's a bit expensive, but if you manage out your resources and play a bit more of a mid-range game, you'll definitely be able to whittle down the opponent's resources and put them into a bit of an unwinnable position just due to lack of cards and the ability to stop your onslaught. So that's how it goes. Still though, a 4 of, really powerful restander, and although it is a bit expensive in the context of this deck, he is definitely a part of your winning image. The next grade 2 we have is 3 copies of something that is going to be a staple for any sort of mass deck, which is Skullcamta. Now, Skullcamta gets a little bit of a bad rap because in a deck that already has several important CBs, this is another counterblast, but I'm going to explain why I still run 3 of this guy. So Skullcamta's skill is a sort of a generic skill that applies to any of these quote-unquote mask searchers that each nation's going to get. Not everyone of them has it yet, but they're going to get it at some point, I presume. So its skill is that when it's placed on rear, you can counterblast one and soul blast one in order to not only generate a Dragontree marker, which you can see on the screen what that's all about, but you can then add from your deck to your hand. Yes, not a peep or anything, you just simply get to add from deck to hand Masque of Hydragrum. That's really nice. It's a +1 and it gives you the Dragontree marker, which as you can see will give 5k power to a unit on its rear circle as long as your Vanguard has the Masque name. And wouldn't you know, we actually do have a Vanguard with the Masque name. So the way Skullcamta is he is sort of a searcher, which this search is then a searcher in return because it can add this or it can add another Skullcamta. So this is a fairly meaningful +1 because it just literally fetches the recurring grade 3 card that can get you your main boss unit. That's important. Now, Counterblast and Soul Blast is expensive, and that's one of the reasons why I'm only running 3 of it, is because in the later game, you don't need it anymore. You either had this guy or you didn't by turn 4 or something. So this is more just to get you set up in early game if you didn't already see these. That's important. This is essentially running a 3rd, 4th, and 5th Masque of Hydragrum. And when you do it this way, it is a +1. On top of that, it gets you a Dragontree marker. That's a secondary benefit. The marker is really important because giving 5k to a rearguard is all nice and dandy, but we have to remember something. Our multi-attack is based on restanding rearguards. That means that you get to maximize the value of the 5k. That is particularly important when it comes to Imposa, because while Imposa is free and has a secondary skill for toolboxing, unlike Rockargour, also unlike Rockargour, she doesn't have any extra power gain. She is only a 10k base without any of the boosts. So when you give her the Dragontree marker, she starts out 15, and then if you give her an 8k boost from a grade 1, she becomes 23, good number, so on and so forth. That is important. You just get to make her that much more powerful as a rear. Or if you're just getting down and dirty with it, Rockargour can then just be a 25k swinger, 35 on Persona Ride. Those are really nasty numbers. Then he restands on a 1k Vanguard and goes again. It just compounds on your win con when you have that 5k constantly present for these guys. So the Dragontree marker could honestly alone be enough of a justification, because that thing doesn't go away. It is, for the rest of this game, it is on that thing unless your opponent has an effect to get rid of it, but they do not. Not in this format anyway. Sorry, Chaos Breaker. So yeah, that's 3 Skullcamta. Finally, last grade 1. 1 copy of Cranium Burner. Yeah, so remember when all the Drajeweled players, me included, were like, please, Bushy, our god, our lamb, our savior, can you please give us a countercharger? Well, Bushy delivered, but they delivered in the weirdest way possible. So this is Cranium Burner. Not a grade 1 like I was hoping the countercharge would be. It is a grade 2. And what it does is when it attacks, if you have a Vanguard with Drajeweled in its name, it gets 2k power. Then afterwards, you can retire this unit if you have Soul Blasted 4 or more at the same time for the effect cost of an effect. You can retire it and countercharge 1. Yeah, so this is the countercharge, but there's a couple issues with it. One, you have to get rid of this card, so it's a neg 1, but the primary issue is that it's a grade 2 and it's meant to attack. It has to attack to get off its countercharge. That's a problem, because as you might have noticed, we have not 1, not 2, but 3 other grade 2s that are already calling dibs on the front row circles. So you have to forego the ideal formation here, or just shove things like Skullcamtas at the back row just to be able to attack with this guy. However, in a simplified game state, you may very well just have to do that, because if you have no CB, Rockargours are offline, this is offline, so that takes those 2 out, and you may only have access to 1 Imposa, so then your front row formation is going to suddenly look like this. And then you'll just attack with that and get the counter charge to try and keep up with your resources and still be able to CB for this on the next turn. You may have to do that. So that's why I do run a copy of it, but only 1. Because if you see it, you hold on to it. If you soul charge it, Imposa can get it back if you need it. So this is just an emergency button in case you haven't been able to manage your resources correctly. But that's about it. The 2K is a little bit interesting because that is a fairly good number. Remember, you're supposed to break over 5k thresholds. 10 isn't breaking over a 5k margin. It's actually exact numbers on that margin, and that's bad on a 1k Vanguard. This breaks a little bit past that to be 12k, and that's perfectly serviceable. That is going to require the 15 guard with basically no effort on the on your part, but 15 guard effort on the opponent's part. That's pretty good. I do like that number a lot. However, when it's boosted by an 8k, it then becomes lame again, because then it's just 20, and so your opponent can just guard the front trigger and stop that. It becomes an inconvenient number again, so go figure. Still though, Cranium Burner, he's decent as a countercharge option. It's basically all we got, so I just decided to opt for the 1-up because you can toolbox it, but 9 times out of 10, you're probably not resolving it. Alright, on to grade 1s. So, our grade 1 lineup is pretty small, unfortunately, because we already have to focus a lot on grade 2s and 3s just to try and make the engine going have good beaters. So this is 3 copies of Falcate Performer. Now, Falcate Performer is a little bit weird because not only is it super expensive because of Grunge players, thanks a lot guys, but also it's in a bit of a weird position with Goma. Now, Falcate's effect, for a refresher, is that when it boosts, you can choose a card from your drop zone and put it in the soul if your soul does not have a card with the same grade as the chosen card. So if you're missing a particular grade in your soul, this guy can fetch it back for you. It's not a hard once per turn, so if you have multiples in the back row, you can boost and get multiples back in the soul. It's really good utility. Now, where this gets a little bit weird is that the weakness of Falcate is if there's already a full grade lineup in your soul, then he's essentially a vanilla booster. And that's more inclined to happen than it was previously because of Goma. This already adds 2 grades of your choice into the soul. Now, people would use that as a reason to be like, oh, well, crap, now I can't actually, make full use of Falcate. But that's incorrect. All you have to do then is deliberately, with this guy, put in cards with grades that you already have in the soul and have these guys fill in the missing grades. That way you actually plus up on soul for the next turn. So that's the real strategy there. And on top of that, you can also have a situation where you didn't see this guy, you need to set up the missing soul for the first grade 3 turn, and this guy's going to save your ass. So it's really important to do that. That's why I still run the 3 Falcate. And when you do play the Falcates correctly, they can also really help out if you can't pay for the cost of this guy either. So whether it's in the early game or in the late game, the Falcates are just a really good backup plan. They're much better than the Blind Soul Charge. And even if there's going to be a turn or two where they don't have an effect, they're still going to be boosters for you. Having a Falcate Performer behind the Vanguard is a really nice situation. Not just because he can put in a missing grade into the soul before this effect triggers, but 13 plus 8 is 21. I mentioned the magic numbers on a 1k base Vanguard, and 21 definitely checks out. That's already going to ask them for 25 on its own. This is a Vanguard with a crit and twin drive. That's devastating, and because of the retires, you may have gotten rid of defensive units like interceptors. This is very scary. It's a very good backup plan. As a matter of fact, the attrition of this unit in particular is so great that there have been situations, I kid you not, where all I did was I would just stand, draw for turn, and simply swing and activate skill, not play any rear guards on the field. The reason being that not only will this retire 2 of their rear guards, but they're probably going to need to take out 2 cards from their hand just to be able to guard the attack, whether it be a PG or 2 other units. That means that for no cards investment on your part, you got rid of 4 of their cards. The value conversion of that is incredibly in your favor, and it's one of the reasons why Goma here is really good at the tempo and attrition game, and it's the main strategy here. So you have to play into that as much as possible, and Falcate is a good way to keep you going. Now, the other grade 1 booster we've got here is a couple copies of Twin Marvel. Now, Twin Marvel is a little bit of a funny inclusion because he's intended to be a Alma Jester card, but guess what? We can use him too. So his skill is rather simple. When your Vanguard Soul Blast 3 or more at the same time for the cost of an ability, you can look at the top card of the deck and place it either back on top of the deck or in the soul, and this guy will get 2k power. So, yes, we do get top deck manipulation with this guy. That means that your twin drive is more likely to be impactful. Plus, you can get a card into the soul with this for absolutely free. That is really nice. It's not a hard once per turn. You have multiples of them, then boom, they check multiple times. They don't need to boost and they don't need to attack. They just need to be out here, see that your Goma or Mahoryu even, just see that they did their thing and they go bing. One funny thing about this card in particular is that the 2k doesn't matter as a boost. Let's think about it for a second. The 1k base, remember the magic numbers. The difference between 21 and 23 doesn't matter on a 1k base. The difference between 18 and 20 doesn't matter on a 1k base. And also the difference between a 16 and an 18 doesn't matter on a 1k base. So when does it matter? This is ironic, but the one time it matters is if you happen to be swinging with the Cranium Burner. Because with the Cranium Burner, recall, he has 2k. Now normally, 12 plus 8 equals 20. I mentioned that's a crappy number, but if you've got Twin Marvel here, it then becomes 22 instead, and that is good on the magic number system that we're dealing with for Drajeweled. So that is the one time it's significant. But if we're also being real, you can just have Twin Marvel be a front row attacker. It can just swing for 10 and crap if you want to take it that way as well. But really the power boost is not what matters. It's the top deck manipulation. I just wanted to point that out in case people were wondering how to make good calls to this guy. The real answer is just play him as you normally would. Preferably put him behind one of the rear guard back rows here, so in the corners. That way that if they get rid of your units or you have to intercept, you simply slide him up and have him be an attacker. Simple as that. So it's a good backup plan. If you have no other boosters for Drajeweled and you want more pressure, you can do it, but preferably the back row center here, you could do it for Falcate. Alternatively, you could put Falcate over here to the side if you're missing a card in the soul and you want to proc Rockargour skill, because Rockargour gets 10k only if he sees that you have 4 different grades in the soul. So if you boost like this, then you can put in the missing grade and then trigger his power gain effect. So if that's the case, then put him back here. Falcate is fairly versatile, and this one a little bit less so, but still you can put it wherever you want. So just interchangeably put your boosters wherever they're most needed to make the strategy efficient and complete. Now then, no discussion of the grade 1 is going to be completely finished until we deal with PGs, of course. Grade 1 PGs, standard. It's just 3 of your typical D standard PG along with Elementaria Sanctitude. No explanations here needed. Alright, time for trigger lineup. Now, if you saw my last deck profile, this is probably not going to be too big of a surprise. We've got 4 crit, followed by 4 draw, that's right, 3 front, 4 heal, and the over. Okay, so why the hell do I play Rainbow? So the reason why I play Rainbow is simply because I think all of these trigger effects are valid in this deck and they're all very important. Now, the thing about Rainbow is when you think about it from a consistency standpoint, you're less likely to see any particular trigger, but you don't need to see any particular trigger all that much in the deck. Because of the attack patterns, you can abuse a critical trigger more than you normally could because the rear guards have already restood by the time that the Vanguard attacks, so you can't get multiple swings on a crit. The heal trigger is self-explanatory. The front trigger works on the front row, and it'll work a lot of the times on the front row, so that's why it's valid, because even if you can't get restanders, you'll then just simply swing with your Vanguard first to reduce their power immediately, so that works. The draw trigger is also here because guess what? You're very piece reliant. You need pieces to set up soul. You need pieces to get your multi-attack. You need pieces in order to even set up your dude here with things like Masque of Hydragrum. There is a lot of pieces that you need, and the draw trigger is going to get you there. One also nice benefit to the Rainbow, in addition of having the variety, is it is also good for variety and shield value. You get 10k shields, you get 20k shields, and of course your regular 15s. You just get to have the whole shebang on your shield value, so if you're having like a bit of everything in the hand, you can guard as efficiently as humanly possible that way. And also, your opponent can't really predict you as easily. If they see the draw triggers, they might not be expecting the fronts, and then when the front comes down, they could be like, oh boy. Or maybe they haven't seen a front from you yet, but then suddenly they think, oh, well, that means it's going to be a pain in the ass to guard for 20, and then you throw this down, it's like, haha, sucker, cost 1 card from my hand. What are you going to do now? So, yeah, that's why I play the Rainbow, because it's all valid, and there's just inherent benefits to running the versatile lineup like that. Alright, and that's going to do it for the deck. So then, what do I got to say about this new and improved version of Drajeweled? Well, I think it's a bit more of a complicated deck to manage because of the added resource element. Counterblast is tough. Being able to get the mask stuff going off is tough. And also, there's just a bit of potential for having weird hands here, but the payoff is extraordinary. He's powerful. He hits really hard. You're able to get rid of a lot of your units. I've stated all the benefits before, but it's a much more dedicated game plan. Drajeweled before was sort of aimlessly this beatdown strategy, but now you actually have the ability to play longer games and get rid of all of your opponent's resources where you're going to kill. It's a much more interesting way to play, albeit it takes more skill in order to keep the deck going and manage your resources properly. But in exchange for that skill, you can more securely take victory out of the jaws of defeat. You're able to just look at the opponent, see the cards they need, get rid of those, and poke down their hand and just play a steady, even-paced game. You don't need to throw out a bunch of Rockargours and attacking if you don't want to. You don't have to just throw out your field and go hard and maximize the amount of cards they get rid of. You can play efficiently. You can play longer. Some people won't really agree with that. They'll think that this is simply a burst card and you just, CB a lot and clap back. And that's certainly true. You do get the tempo aspect of a better going second game, a much better going second game. That's the benefit that any Masque deck is going to get. But the reason why that's beneficial is not because you'll kill the opponent quickly. No, the real benefit behind that is that it lets you catch up and gives you the space to play out your turns more even killed and to your tempo. You don't have to maximize going at them and attacking constantly just because they got to go first and beat you down and you need to play the catch-up game. Not anymore. No. You manage to swing things back into your play view. That is the real impact of Drajeweled Masque here, and it's a very solid deck. it is hard to manage, and you are going to have bad hands and bad soul charges, and sometimes you'll think like you can't keep the strategy going together, but just take your time with it. Practice your ratios. Cut down where you don't need to cut down. There are some options that you can play that can maximize the toolbox, like, you know, Slava. You can get rid of Cranium Burner to add in an extra copy of Falcate if you feel like that's more important. You can add in more of the Masque of Hydragrum if you need to see more of the Masque of Hydragrum. There is ways to build more to your specification. It is a tighter deck for sure because there's a lot of cards you want to see, but you can still play around the ratios a little bit to make it more fine-tuned to your playstyle. So yeah, overall, I'd say it's a definite improvement. It's a much more interesting strategy, and I'm really hyped to continue playing this guy and see what other kind of support he gets. Drajeweled Masque for the win. Alright, and that's going to do it for the deck profile. If you guys liked this kind of content, then I've got a lot of other deck profiles down on the channel below. And I've got all sorts of other content if that's not to your fancy. Top 10s, tier lists, discussion videos, fight nights, the whole shebang. Lots to love, so go ahead and check that out. And if you like what you see, consider leaving a subscribe and turn on the notification bell for the next time I upload a video. And with that, take care, God bless.